The reason why this video came out 2 days late was because of the sheer amount of RPG news that I came across. After realizing that I had 12 pages of article links alone, which would have ended up in a 2-hour-long video had I included them all, I decided to scrap almost every news item from the past 2 months and instead focus on the 10 things that stood out to me the most. Before we get into the news themselves, I want to mention briefly the other projects I'm working on. I'm writing a sci-fi game called Machineborn, which has a playable version available on my Patreon. The game itself is very close to completion and is now undergoing revisions as it's being playtested. I've also recently started working on a new community project for Exalted 3rd Edition that I will put up on the Storyteller's Vault once it's done. It's a revision/continuation of an old homebrew I wrote years ago that lets you play as ghosts. It will include rules for playing as ghosts, for playing as Death Lords, and it will include rules for Arcanoi as well as improved Arcanoi for specific types of ghosts and for Death Lords. There are other content in the document as well, such as new merits, but there's still a lot of work needing to be done. It's going to be $10 on the Storyteller's Vault once it's done, but I don't have an estimated release date yet. If you're subscribed to my content, I'll mention it in a video once it's available. Anyway, let's get back to the news. Batman Gotham City Chronicles is a Batman RPG based on the D20 system. The game is published by Monolith and will launch with 5 books, including a core rulebook called Gotham's Heroes. The other 4 books will be setting and campaign sourcebooks, such as a Gotham City guide that acts as a primary reference for the Batman universe and lore. The players can either play as existing Batman characters or create new ones, and they can play either as vigilantes, police officers, or criminals. Renegade Game Studios have announced a new Power Rangers RPG, which is based on the D&D 5e rule set. The game is part of a renewed partnership between Renegade Game Studios and Hasbro, which also gives the tabletop publishers access to the G.I. Joe, Transformers, and My Little Pony licenses, all of which will get their own deck building and tabletop RPGs according to Renegade, some already in 2021. I was never a fan of Star Wars. I was never a fan of Star Trek. I was, however, a fan of Stargate, and especially SG-1. Because of that, it makes me very happy that a Stargate SG-1 RPG is coming out, where you can go through the portal to explore other worlds yourself. The players in the Stargate RPG are members of the Stargate Command, who are tasked with protecting people from the Goa'uld. This RPG is based on the D&D 5e system and is developed by Wyvern Gaming and collaborated with MGM, which is the media company in charge of the license. The game had a very successful Kickstarter that funded in just a few hours, and the plan is to launch the game at WonderCon 2021 in April. The King Arthur Pendragon RPG is getting a 6th edition, which is described as the ultimate edition of the tabletop RPG created by RuneQuest co-creator Greg Stafford. Originally released in 1985, this is one of the classics of fantasy role-playing. The game is focused more on political and philosophical play than standard D&D hack and slash, which should appeal to the kinds of players who aren't into the dungeon crawl nature of fantasy roleplay. It's also a game known for macro roleplay that can span generations, as characters build families and communities and then retire the characters to start playing their children and children's children. According to Stafford, he started working on this Ultimate Edition 10 years ago, and it's been through multiple stages of development since. The game is not yet slated for release, but will likely have a beginner-friendly quick start before the official release. Nerdvana Games have made the tabletop RPG Bunkers and Badasses with approval from Gearbox. This started out as a comedic DLC for Borderlands 2 called Assault on Dragon Keep a number of years ago, which I'm pretty sure I have a recorded playthrough of on a hard drive somewhere.
Whoa, super badass wolf warlord. Aj, aj, aj. Aj, aj, aj.
Då behöver du min hjälp, det är ganska uppenbart. Det var inte hit jag skulle, tror jag. Nej, det var inte det. Jag gick in i grottan.
Apparently it's now a tabletop RPG that blends fantasy with Borderlands and apparently has edits made by the Borderlands character Tiny Tina. The book has over 200 pages, lots of art, a few good jokes and a lot of bad ones, and 3 full adventure campaigns. It can be pre-ordered from Nerdvana Games website as we speak. Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss, the authors behind the popular Dragonlance series, are suing Wizards of the Coast for an alleged breach of contract regarding their now cancelled trilogy of novels. The authors were approached in 2017 to write this new trilogy, which would have marked a return to the franchise after more than a decade. They worked on the trilogy since, but for some reason Wizards of the Coast decided to pull the plug on a conference call in August, despite entire manuscripts having been written. According to the court filings, the termination was because of the controversy surrounding racism and sexism in Dungeons & Dragons, which has been a big deal throughout this year. The documents state that Wizards of the Coast and their owners Hasbro decided to cancel the trilogy to deflect possible criticism regarding their other properties. This has sparked some questions, though. Apparently Wizards of the Coast had asked the authors to make some sensitivity rewrites regarding certain aspects of the books, including a situation where a love potion is used. The authors allegedly provided the requested rewrites, so it's unclear if this is the reason why Wizards of the Coast backed out. Critical Role is an incredibly successful streaming show where voice actors play D&D. In the years since they started out, they've helped make D&D more mainstream and have even funded an animated series based on the show's first campaign, which will air on Amazon Prime at some point. Continuing the growth of their brand, they've now launched a non-profit organization designed to raise money and awareness for important causes. One of the foundation's intentions is to build relations with other non-profit groups, the first one being First Nations Development Institute, which is dedicated to supporting Native American communities across the US. The starting goal for the partnership was to raise $50,000 for the First Nations Native Youth and Culture Fund, which works to empower the cultural and spiritual beliefs, values and practices within the Native communities. One of the Critical Role Foundation's goals was also to form an emergency fund to be used for unforeseen situations. While White Wolf has been focusing on the 5th edition of Vampire as well as the upcoming Werewolf, Onyx Path has continued to develop the 20th anniversary World of Darkness line. Their latest edition, Ghost Hunters, is kind of Hunter but not really. It's a game that focuses on mortals investigating the paranormal, but it's not actually the Hunter line, which hasn't and most likely won't be given a 20th anniversary edition, since White Wolf wants to focus primarily on 5th edition instead of further expanding the previous one. In Ghost Hunters, the players join various organizations in search of evidence of the supernatural. Like with all major Onyx Path publications, this one came with a successful Kickstarter which ran throughout October. Cyberpunk Red features a 456-page rulebook and is a new edition of the previous Cyberpunk 2020 with its timeline expanded into the 2040s. One of my most anticipated RPGs of this year, Cyberpunk Red is releasing in 2 weeks on November 14. It was initially supposed to release in early summer, but was delayed, initially allegedly because of COVID-19, and was then decided to be released in November alongside the Cyberpunk 2077 video game. The video game has been delayed a couple of more weeks, but the tabletop RPG is still planned to be released on November 14. As the delayed book gave Art Telsorian Games more time to work on it, the final product has an increased page count compared to the original idea. As a result, the book's cover price was increased from $55 to $60 US. I plan to release a review of the game around the time of release, so make sure to subscribe to this channel to be notified when it comes. I bought Blue Rose last year after having heard a lot of hype about the game from co-workers in the industry who had either worked on the game or played it. My original idea was to make a deep dive video of the game, but once I got into it, I felt let down by the hype and ultimately disappointed in the game itself. First of all, I wasn't a fan of Green Ronin's age system, but I also found that Blue Rose itself fell into the same pits that Dungeons & Dragons had and that caused them so much controversy this year. Instead of reading of a world that had been hyped to be a much more inclusive romance fantasy, I found Blue Rose's world to be shallow and still have the same problematic racial depictions that D&D had. It was better and more inclusive in many ways, and I liked that it focused much more on building connections than simply fighting, but it still felt shallow to me, and I decided not to go through with my deep dive. But there are plenty of people who like the world of Aldea, and for them I'm sure this will be positive news. The Blue Rose Adventurer's Guide is a complete setting sourcebook for Aldea made for D&D 5th edition. While my interest for D&D has dwindled in recent time, I still think it's a good idea for Green Ronin to bring this book to 5th edition. I also have hope that a new Blue Rose book fixes some of the issues that put me off the setting by adding more depth to it. They've already addressed some of the racial depictions in the new version, as they are moving away from racial bonuses and languages. Something differentiating Blue Rose from D&D is the focus on connection, empathy and kindness, which I feel deserve mechanical incentives in the game. One of the reasons why I don't like D&D very much is that it puts too much focus on combat, and I've always preferred social roleplay. I hope that the Blue Rose Adventures Guide will provide some unique approaches to social roleplay that D&D is otherwise lacking, but I guess we'll have to wait and see before we know for sure. This is it for RPG news this time around. If you like this video and want to see more, make sure to like, comment, share and subscribe. If you're interested in my other projects, make sure to visit my Patreon. Until next time.